everybody. I was not planning on filming this right now. I am at my happy place. Hang on. You can be at my happy place with me. Down at the river because I needed to clear my head. I needed a break. And I needed to get out of my house. And here I am. And I've been thinking about you all. Oh, there's my hand. Doesn't matter. I'm not used to selfie videoing on the river, so here we go. Here, now there's sunshine in my face, better. But I'm down here and, this is the place I love to come, and I love to paint so much of the beauty here. And even with all of the leaves gone, it's still a really beautiful place to be. And I was thinking about all the trees that surround me that are usually so beautiful and full of so many colors. And but most of them are just bare or kind of crunchy and brown and on their way out. And I thought, man, that's kind of how our life feels a little bit right now, doesn't it? Like kind of bare, kind of brown, kind of crunchy. For many of us, a season of unmet desires, dashed expectations, things people were missing and things that we wish we could be doing but we're not. Kind of just a season of dry and crunchy. But here's what we know to be true from looking at these trees, is that they won't always be like this, right? That I know that every month I come back there will be a change. And that just because something looks like this now doesn't mean that this is its plan forever. And so as you listen to Tana's story today, I want you to listen to her plans. How many times she talks about her own plans and her own desires. And I want you to think about what plans that you have that are maybe feeling a little bit dried up and crunchy right now. And then we'll come back and talk a little bit more.
Hello, my name is Tana Kinder, and I'm going to share with you how my parents came to name me and how it impacted my path. My parents were married in September of 1956, and my oldest brother was born in July of 1957. My mother was 21 and my father was 26 when my brother Mitchell was born. This wouldn't be unusual, except that my brother was born with Down syndrome, and my parents were told not to take him home because he wouldn't live long, he wouldn't walk or talk, and he would age you just taking care of him. I could not imagine making that decision as a young married couple that had only been married for 10 months. Initially, my parents took the doctor's advice and they placed Mitchell in a home for kids with developmental disabilities. Within 2 weeks, my parents did change their minds and they decided that Mitchell should be with them. They didn't know how they were going to take care of him, but they felt that it would be better for him to be with them. In 1957, there were not many services to support kids and families like ours. My mother found out about a support group for families with children that had developmental disabilities. The woman that ran the group was immensely helpful. She told my mother she was going to be able to take care of Mitchell, and he was going to be okay, she would be okay, and she wasn't alone. Her encouragement meant a lot to my parents. 2 years later, my brother Matthew was born, and he and Mitchell grew up together playing, walking, talking, and eventually riding bicycles and swimming. Matt didn't know that Mitchell wasn't supposed to walk or talk. I was born 9 years later, and my little sister was born 3.5 years after me. When I was little, I hated my name. Kids would tease me about it, the way kids do. I asked my parents why they named me Tana. They told me the story about this woman that they had met who had helped my parents, especially my mom, navigating raising a child with developmental disabilities. That connection was so important to my mom. My parents agreed that if they ever had a daughter, that they were going to name her after this woman, Tana. My name was the start of my path for my career and vocation. Because of Mitchell, I was exposed to lots of people with a variety of disabilities through his school and extracurricular activities, including the Special Olympics. My high school marching band that I was a member of even played for the regional Special Olympics that Mitchell participated in. My dad and another father of a little girl with Down syndrome started the first Cub Scout troop for boys with developmental disabilities in the area because they were not allowed to join the local troop. I learned at a very early age not to focus on what you can't do and to look at what you can do and what can be done. While volunteering at Mitchell School, my freshman year of high school, I learned of an organization that provided services to people like Mitchell. I researched what they did and how they helped my brother. At the age of 14, I decided I would go to college and get whatever degree that I needed to work at Alta California Regional Center. The receptionist was my college counselor. At that point, I knew this was my path, and as I looked into what I needed to do, steps would just fall into place. I found out I needed a master's degree in social work. I knew nothing about social work or what other career options there were, but I didn't care because I knew I was going to get a job at ACRC. I arranged for my last internship to be at the Regional Center, or ACRC. The master's program said I needed to have more than one choice for my internship in case I didn't get my first choice, but I told them I was only interested in ACRC because I was going to work there. They were going to hire me. I believe God's hand was at work throughout my schooling. Things fell into place. I did the work and prepared, but God opened the doors. I did get hired at my last internship, the one at ACRC. I held many positions while working there. I was the youngest person to become a supervisor, and my plan was to become the director of the agency. I was sure this was going to happen. I had a plan. I was named after a lady who advocated for people and was employed right where I wanted to be. I got my degree. Everything fell into place. I even met my husband, John, at ACRC. God knew me. I was at a place where I was just done dating, so God brought a man to my workplace. After John and I were married for about 4 years, we had our first child. Because of planning, I was able to take off 6 months to be at home with our baby. When I went back to work, my youngest sister took care of our son. This provided a lot of relief because I knew our child was in good hands, and going back to work was part of my plan. My next step was to become a division director and wait for the agency director to retire and then apply for that position. I had it all mapped out. Along the way, a coworker asked me if I'd be interested in working part-time for a foster family agency. I knew nothing about this field other than what I had learned in school. She said they really needed social workers. So I told her I would be willing to work with one foster family and see how it went. I was worried that this would just be too hard for me to do, working with kids that were taken from their biological families that may have experienced abuse or neglect. I also had this little baby at home and I felt like it would just hit too close to home. What I did find out is that I actually liked working with foster families and foster youth. I picked up a couple of more foster family homes, but my passion was still working at ACRC. I supervised a specialized unit that focused on problem solving and creating services for difficult circumstances and needs. It was very exciting. 2 years later, I got pregnant with our second child. This was part of my plan, just as my first pregnancy was part of the plan. I knew my sister could not take care of both our kids, her kids, and her own kids full time. I started thinking about how I could make this work and continue my career path. I was trying to put a plan together that would resemble some sort of a work and life balance that I could live with. John and I talked about what we wanted for our children, for ourselves, and for our whole family. He supported me going back to work full time and doing my part time foster agency gig. We talked about what it would look like for him to work part time or staying home full time. We talked about what it would look like for me to stay home full time. I realized for me, I needed to stay home and raise our kids full time. I really struggled coming to that realization because I'd had my entire career mapped out, and this internal conflict I was having was not part of my plan. How could this be? I knew where I wanted to work uh, for my entire career. I was named after this woman that had a lifelong impact on my family. I had seen other women do it. Why wasn't God paving the way for me to clone myself? Proverbs is full of insight about human nature and God's nature. And one verse that struck me is Proverbs 16:9. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. What I ended up doing was keeping my part-time gig, working for the foster family agency, and leaving ACRC. It's a really long story, but essentially things became too toxic at the regional center, and it just made it easier for me to leave. I became more unhappy each day. So when I look back at the big part of my life, I realized God had a plan, and a lot of my plan coincided with His plan. But I couldn't get God on board with my whole plan. This is still something I struggle with, being in God's will and seeing the gift He has for me as being the best gift. James 1 verse 17 says, "Every good and perfect gift is from above." I know this, and yet I try to exchange God's gift for something I want, thinking my plan is better, thinking my plan is actually God's plan. God put a woman in my parents' life that I would be named after. I was given a first-hand look at what it's like for the families I served on having a family member with a developmental disability. I made lifelong friends. I met my husband at my dream job. God also knew, though, that I wanted children and I wanted to work outside the home, to be engaged in my community, to continue to climb the career ladder, and to do it all at the same time. But God also knew how I was wired and what I could handle, and because of that, He placed a co-worker in my life that told me about a foster family agency that was hiring social workers to work as much or as little as they wanted. I believe this opportunity was put before me because God knew how hard the decision to leave what I saw as my plan for His plan. That part-time job opened my mind and heart to the possibilities and opportunities to see other gifts that God had in store for me. I think as women, it can be really hard to try and juggle all our dreams, our goals, and responsibilities. There is a saying that I'm sure many of you have heard, and for me as a mom, a wife, a professional, and a woman, it really resonates. Comparison is the thief of joy. I knew what I wanted. I saw others that had done what I wanted to do, that set goals, and they just made it happen, but God had a plan. I trust and believe that His plan is better because He knows me better than I know myself. As we are now in this Christmas season, I hope you spend a little time reflecting on the gifts that God has given you, because God's gifts are the best.
I love Tana's story. I love that she lived or lives a life that probably feels pretty typical to many of us. That life of, okay, I did all the things, I followed God's call, I even responded to what seemed like signs from Him, and for the most part, I love when she says that her life plans coincided with God's plans. But then she said, but I couldn't get Him to sign on to my whole plan. And I think that's a place where we find ourselves often. Like, wait, everything was going great. I thought I had this all figured out. And yet now I'm hitting a speed bump. Or now actually my car has flipped and is on fire and I've been decapitated. Sometimes when we think we're trucking along in God's plan, something catastrophic happens, or even just inconvenient and uncomfortable. And what do we do then? I can imagine during that season, oh my gosh, a huge fish just jumped. Okay, sidebar, back to the lesson. I can imagine during that season that people may have spoken these words to Tana. And they may have said, Tana, listen to what the Lord says. He says, I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Those come from Jeremiah 29:11. And probably besides John 3:16, they're some of the most familiar that we know. But here's the problem. Those words, taken out of context, actually lose a lot of their meaning. And here's what I mean. And I'm actually going to go a little geeky on you. We're going to take a little nature walk, okay? So I think I'm going to flip it around. I don't know if I can do that while I'm filming, so you're just going to walk over here with me. Okay, so that word was spoken to God's people, to the Israelites. It's actually, it should be translated more like, I know the plans I have for y'all. Okay, so it was spoken to a group of people. And the context is super important. The context is that Jeremiah was a prophet talking to a disobedient people who were in a world of hurt. A little further back in Jeremiah 29:4, God refers to Himself as the God who carried His people into exile. So the Israelites had been disobeying God. He'd been warning them, and they didn't listen. And so he allowed the Babylonians to come in and swoop in and take them away. And they were being punished, essentially, like a super long time out. They'd lost everything that was dear to them. Talk about speed bumps and roadblocks and train wrecks. The Israelites were living it. And so God says to them, in the midst of that, in the midst of their hardship, in the midst of their disobedience, in the midst of their struggle and their questioning, when will this end? When will this end? He says, I know the plans I have for y'all. Not just to one person, but he says this to a community, because he knows that when one suffers, the community suffers. And I think we're all suffering in community right now. We're in this great collective exile, whether it's because of our own disobedience or because of the reign of sin on this earth. I'm not gonna, I think it's probably a little bit of both, honestly. But let's not fight about that. Let's just say that life sucks a little bit right now. It's crunchy and brown. But God says to his people then, and says to us now, even in our exile, I know the plans I have for you. And honestly, I think the first blessing of that verse is just its existence at all. That in the midst of hardship, God speaks hope. And just that God speaks. Like he could have said, y'all, you just screwed up so much, I'm done with you. But he speaks to his people words of hope. And not only that, so not only does he speak hope into their context, but he also gives their hope a boundary. And he says, okay, I know this is hard, but it's not gonna be forever. Right before Jeremiah 29:11 is Jeremiah 29:10. That says, I can't flip over to my Bible app while I'm filming, but essentially, you're going to be in this dumpster fire for 70 years. And that number we could talk about another time, but it basically corresponds to the number of years that the Israelites were disobedient to the Lord in not keeping a Sabbath, not following his instructions, doing all the things. So he says, hey, this sucks. That's the Hebrew. This is awful. This is hard. It's gonna stink, but it will end. It will come to an end in 70 years. And so it makes me think, so we're gonna geek out for just a minute. Like when we look at these trees and we look, they're dead, but we know that they're not always gonna stay that way. And now I'm gonna get super geeky and show you something that I really love about being on the river in the wintertime. But I have to explain first. When we moved here from Tennessee 6 years ago, the first thing I did was go on a walk on the river in August with a friend of a friend of a friend. And I had just flown in from Tennessee, where it is always green, always green. Nothing dies. It just grows or molds pretty much. And we walked down on the river and it was brown, except I learned now that that's gold, California gold. The grass turns gold. It was brown and dead and yucky, and I thought, why is she not apologizing for this death? Like, we're walking through this dead grass. But I've learned to love the gold, but I've also learned to love this. So, okay, I'm gonna geek out. We're gonna come over here. So everything looks brown, right? But this happens every year in December, and it makes me so excited. Okay, now we're getting like, if people pass by, they're gonna think I'm crazy. Look what's growing. Look what's growing up through the depth. Little sprigs of new grass. It's like one of my favorite things. Like, oh, yeah, the death part, it'll be over. Like all of the sun has scorched these last 6 months, it comes to an end, and starting in December, new life begins. This is crazy. It's never been like this anywhere else I've lived. Everywhere else I've lived in the wintertime, everything dies. Like winter is for death. But here we have this amazing juxtaposition. Dead trees, but then the hope of the new grass growing up. And even look, okay, so there's even a little bit more hope. Like if all of the leaves were all over this tree, we wouldn't get to see this awesomeness. Like camo's the new thing, right? So here, we get cool camo on our trees, like beautiful bark. We get to see structure. We get to see all sorts of things when things die. And so as you follow the Lord in this season that feels brown and crunchy, I want you to hear his words to you. Those words of, hey, I see you. I know you're suffering. I know you're there. And I have words of hope for you, that I'm the God who wants you to prosper. I'm not a God who wants harm for you. I'm a God of hope. I'm a God of the future. And there will be an end to this season. Now, before we jump to conclusions, I'm not just talking about like, hey, when the vaccine comes, this whole COVID thing is going to be over, or when the cold weather ends, then we're going to be okay. We know, like already, that man can't affect this kind of hope, no matter how much technology or wisdom or sanitation measures we take. Is that the right word? I don't even know. That's not really where our hope comes from. Ultimately, our hope comes from the fact that Jesus is going to come back, that his plans for us, his hope and future for us include him coming back to dwell with us forever. That Jesus is going to come back and restore all of the crunchy, all of the death, all of the sadness, that he's going to come and make all things new. And so here is my challenge for you this week. Make a list, like in your journal or wherever, even in the Facebook comments below. Like, what's your crunchy? Write down the things that are dead, the things that are brown, the things that are dusty and dying. But then I want you to make a list of the sprigs of hope that you see. Maybe there's just one. And then ask the Lord to speak to you in those places. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Sure would love to hear from you. Write your comments below. Let's pray for each other's brown and crunchy. Let's celebrate each other's green and hopeful. And if you're able, join us at the tea party. I know I look very tea party-ish here. I'll put my pinky up. There's my car keys because I had to drive here. Put my pinky up, practice for tea. But it's it's the 12th at 4 o'clock. Hop on Zoom. You can find the link in another Facebook post somewhere. You can't probably get the amazingness, the little Adele has sent packages to many who have RSVP'd, but you can definitely join us, and we sure would love to see your face. Love you all. He has hope for you, plan, future, all that good stuff.